Okay, chapter 14, studies at UNISA and meeting Tia. Political science, or shall I rather say politics, had quite an influence in my life. First, it was with the escapade with Mafuta and Benny some years ago, and then political science that made me enroll in law. Thank you, Mace. And then in my second year, I had a junior lecturer who was teaching political science, and I didn't like the bastard because he got quite an attitude, um, because he felt that male students had to wear ties in his class. Now, I had just finished my military service a year before. Nobody tells me you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do that. My days of jumping around when somebody barks are over. And I told him there was no dress code. The university had no dress code. I told him to go jump in the lake. And of course, I knew, okay, now the son of a bitch is going to fail me when we get to tests and all that. So I had to make another plan. So I had two choices. Either I had to drop political science as a subject altogether and enroll in another subject instead of political science, or I had to quit Pretoria University altogether and enroll at University of South Africa, which was a correspondence university. And of course, a much more disciplined environment because there was no classes to attend. Everything was correspondence. You enrolled at that university, you got your year's study material, and the rest was up to you. You had to make sure that you get your assignments in time, handed in time, that they were marked and seen, and hopefully you will do your work well enough so that you are scored, that you will be admitted to the exams in October, November. And, UNISA was and is probably the largest university when it comes to correspondence enrollment. In those days, there was no such thing as the internet. So, everything was correspondence wise. Um, you had to do your assignments, mail them in, and with a self-addressed return envelope, etc., etc. And your lecturer will mark it and score it and return it back to you, mail it back to you. And you had to have a minimum of 50% year point average in order to be admitted or allowed to sit for the exams. And then besides that, you had to have 50% score minimum in the exams to pass. The passing grade was 50%. It was not like in other universities, if you had a year point of 60, that you have to score a minimum of 40 in the exam. No, not UNISA. You had to have 50%. 50% to admitted to be allowed to sit for the exams, and 50% passing grade as well. Now, UNISA at that stage had a student enrollment of 400,000 students. It's a huge university, but I still think it was a fantastic university. But the standards were exceptionally high. I told you what the passing grade was, the minimum grade you have to be allowed to sit for the exams. And then, of course, as I say, the passing grade was the standards of the university was very high. The highest score I ever got for any subject while I was studying for my BA Juris, for my baccalaureate Juris there, was 68%. The lowest I got was 49% for Roman law, and I flunked it. It would not give me 50% so that I can pass it. I had to rewrite that exam in January, and I passed it. I got 50% or 51%. Yeah, they were tough, man. But anyhow, it was so funny. Maybe I should just bring this in here. I forgot to mention it. When I had this decision to make, okay, I've got to go back to another university, or I have to enroll in some other subject. And then, of course, I decided to go to UNISA. But now it was a matter of, I've got to discuss this with my dad first. My father was always a very reasonable man. He said to me, you do what you want. Do what you feel you're comfortable with. As long as you just remember, my criterion is if you pass, I pay your studies. If you fail, you pay your studies. And 100%, we had a deal. And on top of it all, the following morning, I was when the doors at UNISA swung open at 9 o'clock, I was there. And I enrolled for my Bachelor of Jurisprudence at UNISA. Got all my study material, etc., etc., etc. But then I thought, wait a minute. No, it actually was the other way around. When my dad said, no, it's okay, you do what you feel comfortable with, I went back to University of Pretoria. I went to the admin building and I asked for a refund of my money that I paid as tuition for the year, because we were still within a certain cutoff date. So I got the money there and I got a refund. I took that money, I went to UNISA and I enrolled there, used that money as a payment at the University of UNISA. So there I was. I enrolled at UNISA and eventually got my degree there. Okay, well, no, that's the other thing. Now, while I was working there at UNISA, of course, during the day, I found that I had much more time for myself or for my studies, as I was not attending class, etc., etc. So I worked on my assignments, and yes, within 2-3 months, I had my work all done and everything scored, and I had my scored well enough so that I was able to sit for the November exams. And I decided I got to find something else to do. So I found a job with the messenger of the court, which is more or less the equivalent of what here is known as the sheriff, except that the messenger of the court is for lower courts and it's only for civilian cases where you would deliver summonses and warrants of execution and things like that. And I was paid very, very well. I got about a buck for every document served. And I was lucky enough to get the center of the city as my area of operation, so I could, file my paperwork or liaise them in a certain numerical order, so I could go up this street up to that point and come down this street as a one way. Go up that street as a one way and come back this way. I would do 200 documents in a day, meaning I had 200 bucks for a day. That was a hell of a lot of money for a student. Compare it to that money that I made, 5 rand a day, just a couple of months before, when Mouse and I went to Mozambique. Anyhow, at that stage, I was dating a girl with the name of Ronelle Blanche. And it just so happened, okay, she was a very devoted student. And that kept me in line as well because, during the daytime, she would run or attend class. And at evening, she had to do what was necessary, study or whatever was required of her. And yeah, so Ronell's discipline rubbed off on me. And weekends we played. During the week we studied. Ah, well, and so it is that Ronell and I, in the April of the following year, of that one second year of mine, we decided to go to Rhodesia. And we went to Rhodesia for 10 days or so. First, we went up through Wanking, stayed with Ronnie van Heerden, that friend of my dad and myself, whom we hunted a couple of times with. And then we continued on to Victoria Falls, and we stayed at the Azambezi River Lodge. $80 a night, but I thought, man, I'm working as messenger of the court. $80 a night, that's nothing. I can afford it. I'm rich. Famous last words. Anyhow, we stayed there for a night or three, and then we decided, okay, we're going to move on to what's a place called, to Kariba town. Now, we considered taking the ferry, Kariba ferry, putting a car, but it's an overnight trip from where is it? Mlabezi, I think it's Mlabezi. Yeah, Mlabezi to Lake Kariba. But I very soon found out that I wasn't as rich as I thought, because it was something like 230 rand or $230 just for the fee to get the car from where we were to Lake Kariba. And that's when we decided, no, we're going to drive. But I was not going to go with a long way around with a paved road. I remember there was a road all along the shores of Lake Kariba from my military days. I remember that day. But what I probably forgot, or conveniently forgot, was it was only for 4x4 drive vehicles, that road. So you had to sign in on this side, and you had to be out on the other side within 24 hours. Or 12 hours. 12 hours. Yeah, 12. Oh, God, yes, I can't even remember. But you had a cut-off time. If you're not there within the prescribed time, they will send a search party for you. Because this was still, remember, it was still during the war days. And if you're not there by a certain time, they're going to send a military search party for you. And if you were just negligent by not reporting that you were back, or failed to report that you were back, you're going to be paying for that search party, and that was a hefty fine and cost involved. So we decided we're going to go all along the shores of Lake Kariba. It wasn't long, man, right there where Bex now has his camp, not too far from Binga. we got stuck in a bloody dry creek. We thought it was dry because we got stuck. And before we know it, trying to battle and put branches under the wheels and whatever, rocks under the wheels, a bunch of Batonka people came up. Now, those Batonka people in that area, they're the very primitive branch of, not a branch, a very primitive tribe of people. And they did not like white people at all, because white people were, first of all, the reason for their demise, or the demise of their way of living, because they had to vacate their tribal lands because of the building of Lake Kariba. They had no idea what the benefits of hydroelectrics entailed, etc., etc. They did not understand the concept of electricity and whatever. So now here I am, and we need their help, and they don't like white people. Long story short, they saw my coffee flask in the back seat of my car, and they were pointing at that. And obviously, they wanted the coffee flask because it's something for them to carry water in. But I tried to make them understand that the damn flask was broken. I dropped it that morning, and the element inside shattered in a million pieces. So when I unscrewed the top, and I poured out the pieces of elements and I showed it to them, this thing is broken. They were absolutely ecstatic because they saw all these shiny little things and they wanted that even more. I didn't know that. I don't know if they used it for, what do you call it? Yeah, or weaving or breeding or whatever. Whatever. Yeah, well, that's the other thing. I was familiar with these Batonka people, but Renelle was a nervous wreck. I mean, she saw these people because they still filed their teeth in a V form, a V shape. So they smiled at you. You just see this rack of shark teeth looking at you. And I told her, just relax. That's the way. That's the way, and whatever. But man, they saw these thousands of shiny little things, and they wanted it. And so we gave it to them. And man, before we knew it, they pushed us out of there, got the car unstuck, and we were on our way. The more I tried to thank them, the more they ignored me. They were just looking at these little shiny little pieces of broken flask elements. And so there we were on our way again. Oh my God, hello, my baby. So there we were on our way again. And man, it never rains, but it pours. And before we knew it, within another hour or two, we were stuck in another damn creek. And again, we start packing rocks, checking up the car, getting rocks under the car, under the wheels, etc., etc. And here I hear a vehicle coming. And then I saw it was a diesel Land Rover. Turned out to be a guy who was a geologist working at Rio Tinto mine. And in half of the year he was here in Rhodesia, and half of the year he was working in America. I'll never forget his name, Percy Mahati. And of course, he got us out with no problem with a rope that he had with him on his Land Rover. He pulled us out, and he wouldn't have any compensation or anything like that. So very soon we were on our way. But he gave me two addresses, a local address in Rhodesia and a local address in America. And I made sure, I never heard back from him, but I wrote to both those addresses and thanked Percy for his kindness and helping us out. Okay, so there we were on our way again, and we made it before the cutoff time. We made it to Makuti, where, of course, we had to check in again and register that we made it through the distance in a prescribed period of time. Then, of course, we went to the Clouds End Motel, a very famous bar there, where they had such a large collection of military shoulder patches. And I had to go in show Renelle that. And of course, we had a beer or two there. And then we moved on to Lake Kariba, to the Katisak Motel. And we stayed there for a night or two. You can make a note here about the Katisak Motel, because I had a friend, maybe I can just mention it here. It was during my military days there. We had a guy with the name of Chippy. Chippy had a damn owl that he found, a little baby owl. And this owl was on his shoulder no matter where we went. This little owl was either in his pocket or on his shoulder. And I'll never forget, we were there at the Cutty Sark Hotel, and we were going for a beer. And of course, in those days, you're not allowed to take your rifles into a bar. So we had to leave our rifles outside of the bar itself. And Chippy absolutely refused. He was not parting with his rifle under no circumstances. And the guy said, then you're not going into the bar. And with that being said, we said, well, if Chippy cannot be allowed into the bar, we're not going to come into the bar either. Now this guy is either gonna fold or he's gonna lose our beer money. And we said to him, no, okay, we'll come to some agreement. We left the rifles just outside the bar. So if there was a need to grab for our rifles, we could still grab them, like by the door, that kind of thing. The Chippy and his owl, he would not go anywhere with that damn little owl on his shoulder.
So did the bar owner fold?
The
bar owner said, come on in?
Oh yeah, no, we eventually reached a compromise, Now when we left via Salisbury and a place called Enkeldoorn via the Republic of Enkeldoorn. Now, Republic of Enkeldoorn is very much like that, the Republic of Hout Bay, They had a boom there at the hotel, and you could not pass or can't continue on without first having a beer inside the hotel and show your receipt for your beer to the guy who operated the boom. If you did not drink alcohol, you can drink a cup of tea or coffee or a Coke or a soda or whatever the case may be and show that receipt to the boom operator. He would let you go on. It was just, I don't know, it was not a way of making money for the hotel owner. It was just in those days we still had time for each other. We still had time. We still enjoyed life. And it was all a joke. You got to go and pay your toll inside the hotel. That's what it amounted to. You got to go and pay your toll inside the hotel. Okay, so I think we spent the night there, and then we carried on back to South Africa. And when I got back to South Africa, I found out that I'd been called up for military duty again. So I was not long after that, I was hardly back in South Africa, and I was back on my way back for military service again. And strange enough, or sadly enough, when I got back from that call up duty, it was a 3-week camp. It was not a long camp. I got wind of the fact that Renelle went out on me and cheated on me. And that's when I immediately broke up with her because I was very hurt. And actually, I should have been a little bit more considerate and broke up with her. I should have broken up with her a day or 3 later, because I broke up with her on her 21st birthday, and that's probably not a nice way to remember your 21st birthday. But on the other hand, it was not a nice way of me getting back from a military call up, So It is what it is. Broke up with Renelle, and I never saw her again. Never heard of her, never saw her again. And then it was time for, when I got back from the military duty, it was time for our,
Can I break here and make that a part?
yeah,